The grand ballroom shimmered under the dazzling light of crystal chandeliers, each refracting brilliance across the expansive space. Standing in stark contrast to the glamour, Arya moved through the crowd, her uniform a constant reminder of her place here. The air buzzed with laughter, the clink of champagne glasses, and the hum of an elegant string quartet playing in the background. Guests moved effortlessly between finely decorated tables, their expensive attire glistening as if they too were ornaments of wealth. Her hands trembled slightly as she balanced a silver tray loaded with hors d'oeuvres. Each step felt like navigating a minefield, careful not to brush against the flowing gowns or tailored suits of the elite attendees. She avoided eye contact, keeping her head down, but the familiar voice of her mother, Scarlett, pierced through the noise like a blade. "Look at her!" Scarlett's sharp tone carried over the din, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Catering suits her far better than a career ever would. At least she's useful for once." Arya froze mid-step, her cheeks flaming as quiet chuckles rippled around the group. Her mother, perched regally at a table, tilted her champagne glass as if raising a mocking toast to her daughter. Scarlett's words, calculated and precise, landed their blow with practiced ease. Across from her, Priya, the golden child, radiant in her white gown, barely glanced in Arya's direction. She was too busy basking in the admiration of their family friends and gushing over compliments on her perfect day. Swallowing hard, Arya forced a tight smile, her grip tightening on the tray. "Of course, Mom," she murmured under her breath, masking her humiliation. She placed the tray on a nearby table, determined to escape before her emotions got the better of her. But Scarlett wasn't done. "Honestly, Arya, you should take notes," she added, her tone cutting. "Maybe next time you won't embarrass me with your life choices." The fire igniting in Arya's chest burned hotter. Her mother's disdain was nothing new, but tonight it felt sharper, more calculated. She turned on her heel, heading toward the staff area to regain her composure, but the weight of the stairs followed her like a shadow. As she reached the quieter sanctuary of the service corridor, a presence made her pause. A man sat alone at a table near the periphery of the room, his tailored black suit exuding power and precision. He didn't belong to the chattering cliques or laughing circles. Instead, his piercing gaze was fixed on her, calm yet curious. For a moment she felt seen, not as the humiliated daughter or the overlooked server, but as a person. He raised his glass ever so slightly, the gesture ambiguous. Was it sympathy? Amusement? She couldn't tell. Startled by the intensity of his attention, Arya tore her gaze away, dismissing him as just another guest. Yet something about his steady demeanor unsettled her. "Hey!" barked the catering manager. "Quit dawdling, we've got tables to serve." "Yes, right away," she stammered, straightening her apron and stepping back into the cacophony of the ballroom. But even as she resumed her routine, the man's gaze lingered in her thoughts, a flicker of intrigue amidst the storm of her humiliation. By the time the main course was served, Arya's patience was wearing dangerously thin. The weight of Scarlett's relentless jabs had become unbearable. Her mother seized every opportunity to belittle her in front of guests, casually tossing verbal barbs like they were part of the evening's entertainment. Priya, basking in her role as the adored bride, joined in with faux sweet comments that cut just as deep. "Arya!" Priya called out from across the room, her voice laced with exaggerated cheerfulness. "Could you grab more wine for the table? You're so good at serving, after all." Arya's jaw tightened as her grip on the empty tray steadied. She turned without a word, her stomach churning as the familiar laughter of their guests echoed in her ears. She didn't need to look back to know Scarlett would be watching, triumphant in her ability to keep Arya firmly beneath her thumb. As she made her way to the catering station, her thoughts churned with fury and humiliation. How had she let herself become this person? Always on the receiving end of their mockery, always bending to their whims. The anger within her swelled, bubbling dangerously close to the surface. Distracted, she nearly collided with someone blocking her path. Looking up, she found herself face to face with the man from earlier. Up close, his presence was even more striking. His gaze, calm yet commanding, locked onto hers, and for a moment she felt rooted in place. "You deserve better than this," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made her blink in surprise. "Excuse me?" Arya replied, confusion flickering across her face. His lips curved slightly into a faint smile. "You'll see," he said cryptically, before slipping something into her hand, a sleek black business card. Before she could respond, he moved past her, vanishing into the crowd like a shadow. Arya stared at the card, her heart pounding. James Hawthorne, CEO, Hawthorne Investments. The name was unfamiliar, but the weight of it felt significant. The card's embossed lettering gleamed under the light, a stark contrast to the chaos around her. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. Scarlett's taunts grew louder, drawing laughter from a particularly bold circle of guests. The final straw came when Arya accidentally spilled a glass of wine while clearing a table. Scarlett seized the moment, scolding her in front of everyone. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, a symphony of mockery that pierced Arya to her core. Her face burned as tears threatened to spill, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Her resolve hardened. She set the tray down with deliberate force, the clang silencing the laughter around her. "You know what?" she said, her voice steady despite the fire raging inside her. "Enjoy your night. I'm done being your punching bag." Gasps rippled through the crowd as she untied her apron and tossed it onto the table. Scarlett's face turned crimson, her anger barely concealed. But before she could retort, a commanding voice broke through the tension. "I think that's enough for one evening." The man from earlier, James, spoke, stepping forward with calm authority. The room fell silent, his presence commanding attention effortlessly. He placed a protective hand on Arya's shoulder, his gaze fixed firmly on Scarlett. "Arya," he said, his tone softening, "would you care to join me for a moment?" Arya hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. But something in James's expression, sincere and steady, made her nod. As they left the ballroom together, whispers erupted behind them, the weight of judgment heavy in the air. In the quiet corridor outside the ballroom, James stopped and turned to face her. "My name is James Hawthorne," he began, his voice steady but kind. "I couldn't stand by and watch them treat you like that." Arya folded her arms, her guard rising instinctively. "Why do you care?" "You don't even know me." "Because I see potential," James replied simply. "You may not see it yet, but I do. And I'd like to offer you an opportunity." Her thoughts raced as she studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. Who was this man to step into her life, acting like a savior? And what kind of opportunity could he possibly mean? "What kind of opportunity?" she asked, her tone cautious. James smiled faintly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "One that could change everything. When you're ready to take control of your life, call me." He handed her another card, his direct number scrawled neatly on the back. Without waiting for her response, he walked away, leaving her alone in the corridor with the weight of his words hanging in the air. As Arya slipped the card into her pocket, a spark of something unfamiliar stirred within her, a faint but undeniable glimmer of hope. The evening after the wedding was mercifully quiet, but Arya's mind buzzed with the echoes of Scarlett's biting words and the lingering weight of James Hawthorne's offer. Sitting on the edge of the worn-out couch in her tiny apartment, she turned the sleek business card over in her fingers. The embossed text glimmered faintly under the flickering light of her desk lamp. It felt foreign in her hands, an object from a world she didn't belong to. Yet it held a promise, one she couldn't ignore. She glanced around her modest living room, its peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture serving as constant reminders of the limitations she'd grown accustomed to. A few framed photos sat on a nearby shelf, most of them from years ago when her family's dynamic wasn't so fractured. Scarlett's younger face smiled back at her in one photo, but even then, her mother's eyes carried a cold edge. Priya's picture-perfect wedding portrait was conspicuously absent from the collection. Arya sighed and set the card on the coffee table. Calling James felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that she couldn't fix her life on her own. But could she? Scarlett's words haunted her. Catering suits her far better than a career ever would. Was that who she really was? A part of her burned with defiance at the thought. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. The screen lit up with Scarlett's name. She hesitated, then reluctantly answered, bracing herself for the inevitable lecture. "Arya," Scarlett began, her voice clipped and formal. "I hope you've had time to reflect on your behavior last night." Arya rolled her eyes, holding back the sarcastic retort bubbling on her tongue. "What do you want, Mum?" "What I want," Scarlett snapped, "is for you to take some responsibility for once. Priya's wedding was supposed to be perfect, and instead you turned it into a spectacle. You embarrassed yourself, me, and this family." Anger flared in Arya's chest, but she kept her tone even. "If you're calling to guilt me into apologizing, you're wasting your time." Scarlett let out a sharp breath. "Fine, then let's talk about your financial situation. You can't keep scraping by like this, Arya. It's embarrassing for all of us. Your sister and I have been discussing ways you can contribute to the family. It's time you step up." Arya clenched her jaw, gripping the phone tighter. Scarlett's words weren't surprising, but they stung all the same. "Step up? By doing what exactly? Taking a job you approve of? Living a life you control?" "Don't be dramatic," Scarlett retorted. "I'm offering you a chance to prove you can still be part of this family. Priya has suggested a few—" "Enough," Arya cut in, her voice sharp. "I'm done letting you or Priya dictate my life. You don't get to decide who I am or what I'm capable of." Scarlett fell silent for a moment, clearly taken aback. "If you hang up this phone, Arya, don't expect us to come running the next time you fail." Arya's hand trembled as she ended the call without another word. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet in the aftermath, but her heart thundered in her chest. For once she hadn't backed down. Her gaze drifted back to James's business card. The doubt that had clouded her thoughts began to lift, replaced by something sharper. Curiosity. What if this was the chance she needed to break free from Scarlett's grip? To finally prove to herself more than anyone that she was capable of something more. With a deep breath, she grabbed her phone again and dialed the number. It rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. "James Hawthorne speaking." Arya hesitated, the silence stretching between them for a moment too long. She'd made the call impulsively, without fully considering what she'd say or how to explain herself. But there was no turning back now. "Hi, this is Arya," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We met last night at the wedding." "Yes," James said evenly, his tone steady but not impatient. "I was wondering if you'd call." "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch as she tried to keep her nerves in check. "But I wanted to hear more about what you were offering." There was a pause on the other end, but not the awkward kind. It felt deliberate, as if James were carefully considering his words. Why don't we discuss it in person? Are you available to come by my office tomorrow morning? Arya blinked, taken aback by the immediacy of the offer. Your office? Tomorrow? Unless you'd prefer to wait, James said lightly, though there was an undercurrent of challenge in his voice. Opportunities don't often linger, Arya. The words struck her with a strange sense of urgency. She didn't need time to think. She'd already made her decision by dialing the number. Okay, she said firmly. Tomorrow morning works. Excellent. My assistant will email you the details. I look forward to seeing you then. The call ended with a click, and Arya set the phone down, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, but James's directness and efficiency unsettled her. Still, there was something about the way he spoke, calm, assured, and entirely unfazed by her uncertainty, that made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that someone believed she was worth investing in. The next morning, Arya stood outside the towering glass building in downtown Chicago, her reflection staring back at her from the polished surface. Her nerves twisted in her stomach, threatening to undo her resolve. She'd thrown together her best attempt at professional attire, a modest blouse and slacks she hadn't worn since her last interview months ago. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Steeling herself, she stepped inside. The lobby was a vision of modern elegance, with marble floors and soaring ceilings that made her feel small and out of place. A receptionist at a sleek, curved desk greeted her warmly and directed her to the 20th floor. As the elevator doors closed around her, Arya found herself gripping her bag tightly, her thoughts swirling. This was unlike anything she'd ever done before. Stepping into this world felt like crossing into foreign territory, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. When the elevator opened, she was greeted by a bright, airy reception area. A young woman behind a minimalist desk looked up with a professional smile. "You must be Arya," she said. "Mr. Hawthorne is expecting you, right this way." Arya followed her through a set of glass doors and into an office that could only be described as commanding. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline, and the space was tastefully decorated with understated luxury. James stood near the window, his back to her, but he turned as she entered, his sharp suit immaculate as ever. "Arya," he greeted her, gesturing toward a seat across from his desk. "I'm glad you came." She nodded, feeling her voice catch in her throat. As she sat down, she couldn't help but notice how comfortable James seemed in his surroundings, his presence effortlessly filling the room. "Before we get into specifics," James began, settling into his own chair, "I want to understand something. What made you pick up the phone and call me?" Arya hesitated, her fingers tightening on the strap of her bag. The question wasn't unexpected, but it forced her to confront the tangled mess of emotions that had driven her here. "I guess," she started, her voice quieter than she'd intended, I needed to prove something. To myself, to my family, that I'm not—" She stopped, biting back the word. "Not what?" James prompted gently. "A failure," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. James leaned back in his chair, studying her with a thoughtful expression. "You're not," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "But proving that isn't about them. It's about you." The simplicity of his words struck a chord, and for a moment, Arya felt a strange sense of relief, as though a weight she didn't realize she was carrying had been lifted. James leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I'm offering you a chance to build something for yourself. It won't be easy, and you'll have to work harder than you ever have before. But if you're willing to put in the effort, I can promise you this. You'll never have to feel powerless again." Arya met his gaze, the flicker of hope she'd felt the night before now burning brighter. "I'm ready," she said, the words surprising even herself with their conviction. James's faint smile returned. Good. Let's get started. Arya stepped into her new role at Hawthorne Investments with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The office floor buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the quieter, structured spaces she had encountered in James's private office. Employees moved purposefully between glass-walled conference rooms, their polished shoes clicking on the sleek tile floors. The environment radiated an air of urgency and professionalism that made her feel like an outsider. Her onboarding began immediately, with a meticulously planned schedule delivered by a brisk and efficient HR representative named Lydia. After handing over a neatly bound employee handbook, Lydia gestured toward a cluster of desks. You'll be working alongside Jenna Parker, our senior project manager. She's one of the best we have, so consider this an opportunity to learn from her. Don't worry if it feels overwhelming at first, Lydia added, her tone softening slightly. It's a lot to take in, but you'll find your footing. Jenna wasn't hard to spot. Her sharp features and tailored suit made her stand out even in this crowd of polished professionals. She was engaged in an intense conversation with a colleague, gesturing toward a large monitor filled with spreadsheets. Arya hesitated, unsure how to interrupt. Before she could decide, Jenna turned and caught her eye. You must be Arya, Jenna said briskly, her tone professional but not particularly warm. James mentioned you'd be starting today. Follow me. Without waiting for a response, Jenna strode toward a nearby desk and motioned for Arya to sit. This is yours for now. We're in the middle of finalizing a presentation for a major client, so you'll be assisting with data preparation and analysis. Let's see what you can do. Arya nodded, trying to mask her nervousness. Jenna's directness left no room for small talk or hesitation. Within minutes, Arya found herself immersed in a whirlwind of spreadsheets, reports, and data models. It was clear this wasn't a place for hand-holding. Expectations were high, and mistakes were not easily forgiven. The hours flew by as Arya tried to keep up. She had never worked in such a fast-paced environment before, and the pressure was palpable. Just when she thought she was finding her rhythm, Jenna appeared at her desk, her expression unreadable. These numbers don't align with the projections, she said, tapping the screen in front of Arya. Redo them and send them to me within the hour. Arya's stomach dropped. She had double-checked her work, but now doubts crept in. I'll fix it, she said, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest. Jenna gave a curt nod and walked away, leaving Arya to face the growing sense of inadequacy gnawing at her. As the deadline loomed, Arya pushed through her doubts and recalculated everything, meticulously cross-checking her work. She sent the revised file to Jenna and leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. Moments later, Jenna approached again, this time with a slight shift in her demeanor. It's accurate now, Jenna said simply. Next time, review before submitting. Arya bit back a sharp reply, opting instead for a quiet nod. The exchange left her feeling like she was teetering on the edge of failure, but she couldn't ignore the glimmer of satisfaction that Jenna had acknowledged her correction. This wasn't going to be easy, but she was determined to prove she belonged here. As the day drew to a close, Arya found herself still seated at her desk, surrounded by a flurry of activity as the office began preparing for the next day's tasks. Despite the exhaustion tugging at her, she stayed focused, eager to absorb every detail she could. Hawthorne Investments wasn't just a job. It felt like her lifeline to something greater, a chance to rewrite the narrative Scarlett had imposed on her. She was deep in a report when she felt someone approach. Looking up, she met the gaze of a man she hadn't seen before. His tailored suit and confident posture screamed authority, but there was something in his smirk that made her bristle. "Arya, right?" he asked, his voice smooth but carrying an edge. Nathan Carter, senior strategist. I heard James brought you in personally. That's interesting. Arya straightened in her seat, unsure how to respond. Yes, that's me, she said cautiously. Nathan leaned against her desk, scanning the screen she'd been working on. Quite a leap for someone with your background. Don't let it go to your head. This place can chew people up if they're not careful. His words felt like a veiled warning, and Arya forced herself to hold his gaze. Thanks for the advice, she replied evenly. I'll keep that in mind. Nathan's smirk widened, as though her response had amused him. We'll see, he said before strolling away, leaving her with a sour taste in her mouth. The exchange rattled her, but she refused to let it show. Nathan might see her as an outsider, but she was determined to prove him, and anyone else who doubted her, wrong. As she turned back to her screen, a shadow fell across her desk. It was Jenna again, this time holding a printed document. You've been added to the team for the Mercer account, she said, setting the folder down in front of Arya. It's one of our most critical projects and we're on a tight timeline. James thinks you're ready, so let's see if he's right. The weight of the assignment hit her immediately. The Mercer account had been mentioned during her onboarding as one of the firm's high-stakes ventures. It wasn't just a test. It was a statement that James was putting his trust in her. Arya took a deep breath, opening the folder and scanning the contents. It was a maze of data, projections, and proposals, but she didn't flinch. I'll get started right away, she said, looking up at Jenna with a newfound determination. Jenna paused, her sharp eyes studying Arya for a moment before nodding. Good. We'll be presenting preliminary findings to Mercer's team next week. I'll expect your input. As Jenna walked away, Arya felt the weight of the challenge settle on her shoulders, but it didn't crush her. Instead, it ignited something inside her, a flicker of confidence that had been buried for too long. When the office finally emptied out and the hum of the day gave way to silence, Arya stayed behind. She pored over the details of the Mercer account, determined to not only meet expectations, but exceed them. This was her chance to show James, Jenna, Nathan, and, most importantly, herself, that she was more than capable. By the time she finally left the building, the Chicago skyline glimmered under the night sky. The crisp air filled her lungs as she stepped onto the bustling street below. Exhausted but resolute, she knew she was only at the beginning of a steep climb. But for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to take it on. This momentum set the stage for the challenges and rivalries she would face in the chapters ahead, particularly with Nathan and her growing dynamic with Jenna. Let me know how this lands, or if any adjustments are needed. Arya stepped into the office the next morning, the weight of the Mercer account still pressing heavily on her mind. Despite her late-night effort to familiarize herself with the materials, she couldn't shake the feeling of being woefully underprepared. The project wasn't just a test of her skills, it was an unspoken declaration to the entire office that James Hawthorne believed in her. Failing wasn't an option. The energy on the floor was different today, tighter, more focused. Employees moved quickly between desks, clutching folders or gesturing animatedly over their phones. Jenna's commanding voice carried over the hum as she directed her team from a standing position near her desk. Arya slipped into her seat, her eyes scanning the digital files she had left open the night before. Good, you're here early, Jenna said, appearing beside her with a cup of coffee in hand. She placed a stack of documents on Arya's desk. These are the updated market analytics for the Mercer account. Go through them and isolate the key trends. I'll need a summary by midday. Arya nodded, swallowing her nerves. Got it. Before Jenna could say more, Nathan Carter sauntered over, his presence as unwelcome as ever. Busy already, I see, he said, his tone dripping with mock concern. He leaned casually against Arya's desk, his sharp eyes flicking to the documents she had barely begun to process. "You sure you're ready for this? Mercer's a big deal. One misstep and you're out of the running for, well, everything." Jenna's expression hardened as she turned to Nathan. "Carter, if you're done with the theatrics, we could use you on the projections for Q4. Unless, of course, you have more important things to do than your job." Nathan's smirk faltered, though he recovered quickly. "Just making sure everyone's on the same page," he said lightly, before walking off. Arya let out a quiet breath of relief as Jenna turned her attention back to her. "Don't let him rattle you," Jenna said firmly. "He thrives on intimidation, but it's all bark." Arya nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let Nathan, or anyone else, undermine her. She dove into the data Jenna had provided, methodically combing through graphs, charts, and reports. The numbers blurred together at times, but she forced herself to focus, jotting down observations and piecing together patterns. Hours passed in a haze of concentration, and by the time she looked up, it was nearly noon. Jenna returned, her sharp gaze scanning the notes Arya had compiled. "This is solid," she said, her tone neutral but carrying a hint of approval. "You've caught on to the key drivers in the market shift. We'll need to expand on these during the team briefing." Arya felt a flicker of pride at Jenna's acknowledgement, even if it was understated. For someone as demanding as Jenna, even faint praise felt significant. Before she could dwell on it, Jenna handed her a tablet. "You'll present these findings to the team. Be ready in 10 minutes. Arya's stomach dropped. "Present," she repeated, panic creeping into her voice. Jenna's brow arched slightly. "You're capable, or you wouldn't be here. This is how you prove it." Arya's pulse quickened as she stared at the tablet Jenna had handed her. Presenting to the team? She hadn't anticipated this kind of spotlight so soon. The voices of doubt from her past, Scarlett's biting criticisms, Priya's smug dismissals, echoed in her mind, threatening to overwhelm her. But Jenna's pointed gaze left no room for hesitation. This was her moment to rise to the challenge or crumble under the pressure. She nodded, trying to muster confidence. "I'll be ready," she said, though her voice was quieter than she intended. Jenna gave a curt nod before walking away, leaving Arya alone with her racing thoughts. She quickly reviewed her notes, organizing the key points she had spent the morning assembling. The data told a compelling story of shifting market dynamics and untapped opportunities, and Arya focused on those facts to calm her nerves. This wasn't about proving herself to everyone else, she reminded herself. It was about proving herself to herself. When the time came, Arya followed Jenna into the glass-walled conference room where the team had gathered. The room was filled with polished professionals, their expressions expectant but unreadable. Nathan sat near the middle of the table, leaning back in his chair with a smug look that seemed designed to unnerve her. She refused to let it. Jenna introduced the session with her usual efficiency. "We're here to review the preliminary analysis for the Mercer account. Arya has prepared an overview of the market trends and their potential implications for our proposal. Arya, go ahead." All eyes turned to her. Arya's heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and began. Her voice wavered slightly at first, but as she moved through the data, she found her footing. She explained the key trends she had identified, illustrating how shifts in consumer behavior and industry advancements could align with Mercer's objectives. The confidence she had in the material began to show, and her words flowed more naturally as she emphasized actionable insights. By the time she concluded, the room was silent, the weight of her presentation hanging in the air. Jenna broke the pause with a single question, which Arya answered with steady precision. Then came another question, and another, some from Nathan, whose tone dripped with skepticism. But Arya held her ground, countering his attempts to poke holes in her findings with clear, concise responses. When the discussion ended, Jenna leaned forward, her tone decisive. "Good work, Arya. These insights strengthen our approach. We'll refine the details in tomorrow's strategy session." The team nodded in agreement, and even Nathan, though visibly irked, offered no further objections. Arya felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her as the team dispersed. She had survived, and more importantly, she had succeeded. As the room cleared, Jenna lingered for a moment. "You handled that well," she said, her tone softer than usual. "Next time, come in with even more confidence. You've earned it." Arya managed a small smile, the compliment landing more deeply than she expected. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady this time. When Arya returned to her desk, the weight of the day settled on her, but for the first time she felt something new, momentum. The doubts that had plagued her were quieter now, replaced by the realization that she could navigate this world, no matter how foreign it felt. Later that evening, as she left the office, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "Heard you did well today. Keep going." She stared at the screen for a moment, a small smile forming on her lips. This wasn't just James's world she had stepped into, it was becoming hers too. Arya walked into the night, the glittering skyline ahead, a reminder of the climb still waiting for her. But now, she felt ready to face it. The next morning, Arya arrived at the office to find an air of anticipation hanging over the workspace. The Mercer account presentation was only days away, and the entire team seemed to be operating at a heightened level of intensity. Jenna had called for an early meeting to finalize the strategy, and Arya felt the pressure mounting as she reviewed the notes she had prepared the night before. She was settling into her desk when Nathan appeared, his presence unannounced but as unwelcome as ever. He leaned casually against the partition of her workstation, holding a coffee cup like it was a trophy. "Busy morning already, I see," he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of mockery. "Word is, you're getting more involved with the Mercer account. Big step for someone so new." Arya glanced at him, her expression carefully neutral. "It's a big opportunity. I'm doing my best to rise to the challenge." Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "Careful, Arya. James may have his reasons for backing you, but this place has a way of exposing weaknesses. One misstep, and you'll be out of this office faster than you think." His words were designed to unnerve her, but Arya held his gaze steadily. "Thanks for the concern, Nathan. I'll keep that in mind." Before he could respond, Jenna's voice called from across the room. "Carter, let's move. We're starting." Nathan straightened, his smirk fading as he turned and walked toward the conference room. Arya gathered her materials and followed, her resolve strengthening with each step. She couldn't afford to let people like Nathan derail her focus. Inside the glass-walled conference room, the team gathered around the table, laptops and folders spread before them. Jenna stood at the head, her sharp eyes scanning the group. "We're entering the final phase of preparation," she began. "Our approach is strong, but it needs to be flawless. Mercer's team is demanding, and there's no room for error." She turned to Arya, her tone brisk but not unkind. "You've been analyzing the data trends. I want you to lead the discussion on how we position these insights." Arya felt a jolt of anxiety, but quickly pushed it aside. She nodded, opening her laptop and pulling up the presentation slides. "Of course," she said. As Arya began presenting her findings, the room fell silent, all attention fixed on her. She outlined the key trends driving the market shifts, emphasizing their relevance to Mercer's objectives. Her voice gained confidence with each slide, bolstered by the clarity of her analysis. But halfway through her presentation, Nathan interrupted, his tone pointed. "These projections are ambitious. What makes you so confident Mercer's team will find them realistic? The challenge hung in the air, the weight of the question pressing down on the room. Arya paused for a fraction of a second, her mind racing. She knew Nathan wasn't just questioning her work. He was questioning her ability. Arya took a steadying breath, her gaze locking with Nathan's. His challenge had the sharpness of a dagger, but she wasn't going to let it throw her. "These projections are ambitious," she admitted, her tone measured and deliberate. "But they're supported by concrete data. Mercer's team isn't looking for conservative figures. They want solutions that push boundaries while still being grounded in reality. If you look at the comparative analysis on slide 8, she continued, gesturing to the screen, you'll see that similar market strategies in adjacent sectors have yielded comparable results." She clicked to the slide, highlighting the data points she had meticulously prepared. The room leaned in, scrutinizing the information. Nathan opened his mouth as if to rebut, but Jenna spoke first. "She's right," Jenna said, her tone decisive. "The analysis is solid, and Mercer's team will appreciate the forward-thinking approach. What they don't need is hesitation. Carter, if you have concerns, address them constructively." Nathan leaned back in his chair, his smirk replaced by a tight-lipped expression. "No concerns," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Arya's heart pounded as she continued with the presentation, but the moment of doubt had passed. When she finished, Jenna nodded approvingly. "Good work, Arya. We'll refine these points in the next session, but this puts us in a strong position." As the meeting adjourned and the team began filing out, Jenna pulled Arya aside. "You handled that well," she said quietly. "Carter can be difficult, but he's not your biggest challenge. You are. Don't let self-doubt creep in. If you stay focused, you'll get through this." "Thank you," Arya replied, her voice steady despite the lingering tension in her chest. She returned to her desk and dove back into the work. The interruption from Nathan hadn't derailed her. If anything, it had steeled her resolve. She couldn't afford to falter, not now. Every moment spent preparing for the Mercer presentation was another step closer to proving herself, not just to James or Jenna, but to herself. Later that evening, as the office began to empty out, Arya stayed behind, fine-tuning her slides and ensuring every detail was polished to perfection. She didn't notice James until he appeared beside her desk, his presence calm yet commanding as always. "Late night?" he asked, his tone conversational but curious. Arya looked up, startled, but not displeased. "Just making sure everything is ready," she said. "I want the Mercer presentation to be flawless." James nodded, glancing briefly at her screen. "Good. That's the mindset you'll need to succeed here, but don't burn yourself out. It's a marathon, not a sprint." His words carried a subtle weight, and Arya couldn't help but wonder if they came from experience. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. James lingered for a moment longer before walking away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. For all the challenges she faced, Nathan's skepticism, the constant pressure, her own insecurities, Arya felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Belonging. She was beginning to see herself as part of this world, not just a visitor passing through. As she left the office that night, the city lights casting a soft glow over the streets, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The climb was steep, but she was determined to reach the top. No matter how many obstacles stood in her way, she would find a way to rise above them. This chapter bridges Arya's growing confidence and sets the stage for the high-stakes presentation with Mercer's team in the following chapter. Let me know if there are any tweaks you'd like. The house stood as a shadow of its former grandeur. Once a beacon of the Rivera family's pride, it now bore the marks of neglect, a peeling facade, an overgrown lawn, and a dim porch light that flickered intermittently. Arya hesitated at the base of the driveway, her stomach churning as memories of her childhood collided with the reality of the present. Scarlett had summoned her here under the guise of an urgent discussion, but Arya knew better than to expect a cordial reunion. She steeled herself and knocked on the door. It opened swiftly, revealing Scarlett, impeccably dressed as always, though her tailored jacket couldn't fully mask the strain etched into her face. Her sharp eyes scanned Arya, and for a brief moment, something resembling relief flickered across her features. "Come in," Scarlett said briskly, stepping aside. Arya entered, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The grandeur that had once defined the Rivera home had faded. The walls, adorned with outdated wallpaper, bore faint stains, and the air carried a faint mustiness. Scarlett led her into the living room, where Priya sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up as Arya entered, her perfectly groomed features contorting into a scowl. "Look who finally decided to show up," Priya said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm not here to fight," Arya replied evenly, setting her bag down as she took a seat across from them. "What's so urgent that you needed me to come here?" Scarlett perched herself on the edge of an armchair, folding her hands in her lap. "We're in a difficult situation," she began, her voice measured but carrying a hint of uncharacteristic vulnerability. "The family's finances have taken a turn for the worse. Some investments didn't pan out, and the property is at risk." Arya blinked, caught off guard by the admission. Scarlett rarely acknowledged failure, let alone asked for help. "What does that have to do with me?" she asked cautiously. Priya scoffed, tossing her phone onto the coffee table. "Don't act like you're above this, Arya. This is your family too. Mom and I have been carrying the burden long enough." Arya's jaw tightened. "Carrying the burden," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You mean the burden of pretending everything's perfect while treating me like I'm the problem?" "Enough," Scarlett interjected sharply, her tone regaining its usual authority. She fixed Arya with a pointed look. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking you to step up for once. With your connections at Hawthorne, surely there's something you can do." The mention of James's name sent a ripple of anger through Arya. Scarlett had barely concealed her disdain for Arya's new position, and now she wanted to exploit it. "Let me get this straight," Arya said, her voice icy. "You ignored me for years, belittled me at every turn, and now you want me to fix the mess you created?" "Don't be so dramatic," Scarlett snapped. "This isn't about the past, it's about the future, your future. If this house goes, what does that say about us?" Arya stood, unable to suppress the bitterness rising in her throat. "What it says about us is your problem, not mine. I've worked too hard to get where I am, and I'm not going to risk it for people who only call when they need something." Scarlett's composure cracked, her sharp expression shifting into one of desperation. For the first time in years, Arya saw something raw in her mother's eyes, a glimmer of vulnerability that Scarlett had always hidden behind her icy demeanor. "This house is more than just walls and a roof," Scarlett said, her voice softer but still tinged with urgency. "It's our legacy. Your father built this for us. For you and Priya, do you really want to see it taken away?" Arya hesitated, the mention of her father stirring a pang of guilt. She remembered the afternoon spent with him in the backyard, his laughter echoing through the air as he taught her how to plant roses. The house had been his pride, a symbol of the life he had worked tirelessly to build. But the warmth of those memories couldn't erase the years of pain that followed after his passing. "Don't drag Dad into this," Arya said firmly. "You're the one who let things get this bad. You're the one who refused to change." Scarlett's lips pressed into a thin line, but before she could respond, Priya jumped in. "Oh, give me a break," she said, rolling her eyes. You think you're so much better than us just because you got a lucky break with James Hawthorne. But let's not forget, you're still the same Arya who ran out on this family." Arya turned to her sister, her anger bubbling over. "Ran out?" she said, her voice rising. "I didn't run out, Priya. I left because you and Mom made it impossible to stay. You pushed me away, and now you want to act like I owe you something." "You do owe us," Priya shot back. "Everything you have now, you wouldn't have without this family. Without the name Dad gave you." Arya laughed bitterly. "The name that's been nothing but a weight around my neck? The name that you've spent your entire life weaponizing against me." "Enough," Scarlett snapped again, this time with a force that silenced both daughters. She stood, her shoulders squared as she addressed Arya directly. "You may think you've risen above us, but family is family. When one of us falls, we all fall. And if you don't want to help for me or Priya, at least think of what your father would have wanted." The words hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than Arya cared to admit. For a fleeting moment she considered relenting, using her position at Hawthorne Investments to find some way to help. But as she glanced between her mother's steely gaze and Priya's smug expression, the old wounds reopened, reminding her of why she had fought so hard to carve out a life of her own. "I'm not your safety net," Arya said quietly, but her voice carried an edge that silenced any rebuttal. "You don't get to guilt me into fixing your mistakes. I've worked too hard to go back to being the person you can walk all over." Scarlett's expression hardened again, the vulnerability disappearing as quickly as it had come. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice cold. "When this house is gone, when everything your father built is gone, you'll realize what you've done." Arya picked up her bag, her hands shaking slightly, though she refused to show it. "If losing this house means you finally take responsibility, then maybe it's for the best." Without another word, she turned and walked out, the weight of the confrontation pressing on her chest as she stepped into the cool evening air. For all her defiance, the guilt lingered, twisting in her stomach as she made her way back to the city. That night, as she sat in her apartment, the confrontation replayed in her mind. She thought of her father, of the love and pride he had poured into the home that now symbolized so much pain. But Scarlett's manipulation and Priya's entitlement were inescapable reminders of why she couldn't give in. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from Jenna lit up the screen. "We need to regroup on Mercer tomorrow morning. Big updates incoming." The distraction was welcome, even if it meant throwing herself back into the fire. Arya set the phone down and took a deep breath. She wasn't just fighting to escape her family's control. She was fighting to become the person she knew she could be. And that battle was far from over. As she turned off the lights and prepared for the next day, she resolved to face whatever came next with the same determination that had brought her this far. Scarlett's words still echoed in her mind, but they no longer defined her. For once, Arya was in control, and she intended to keep it that way. This chapter sets up the emotional weight and familial tension that will continue to influence Arya's decisions, while transitioning smoothly into her focus on the Mercer project in the next chapter. Let me know if further adjustments are needed. The next morning, Arya walked into the office with renewed determination. The confrontation with her family lingered in the back of her mind, but she refused to let it distract her. Scarlett and Priya had underestimated her for years, and while their latest attempt to control her stung, it also fueled her resolve to succeed on her own terms. The Mercer account was her proving ground, and she intended to show everyone, Nathan, Jenna, even James, that she belonged here. The team had gathered early for an update meeting in the sleek, glass-walled conference room. Jenna stood at the head of the table, her commanding presence setting the tone, as always. Nathan lounged in his seat, his expression bored, but his sharp eyes betraying a keen interest in everything being discussed. Arya sat near the middle, her notes ready and her mind focused. "Before we dive into today's tasks, there's been a development," Jenna began, her tone brisk. "Mercer's team has requested a mid-week progress review. They want to ensure we're aligned before the final presentation." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Nathan was the first to speak, his tone laced with feigned concern. "Mid-week? That's tight. I hope we're ready for that level of scrutiny." "We'll be ready," Jenna said sharply, cutting through his attempt to sow doubt. Her gaze shifted to Arya. "You've been leading the analysis. Mercer's team will want to see actionable insights, not just raw data. I want you to take point on that portion of the review." Arya's stomach flipped, but she kept her expression steady. "Understood," she said, her voice calm despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. Nathan's smirk widened, and he leaned forward slightly. "That's a bold move, Jenna. I mean, it's one thing to run the numbers, but presenting to Mercer's team? That's another story entirely." Jenna's eyes narrowed. "If you have a concern, Carter, you can address it directly. Otherwise, keep your comments to yourself." Nathan raised his hands in mock surrender. "No concerns. Just making sure we're all set for what's at stake." Arya ignored him, focusing instead on the task at hand. She knew Nathan's game, and she refused to let him undermine her confidence. As the meeting continued, Jenna outlined the key deliverables for the review, delegating tasks with her usual efficiency. Arya's role was clear. She would refine the insights from the data and package them into a compelling narrative that would set the tone for the rest of the presentation. By the time the meeting ended, Arya had a clear roadmap of what needed to be done. She returned to her desk and got to work, immersing herself in the data. The numbers told a story, and it was her job to make that story resonate with Mercer's team. The hours flew by as she pieced together trends, correlations, and actionable recommendations. Late in the afternoon, Jenna stopped by her desk. "How's it coming along?" she asked, her tone neutral but expectant. "I'm nearly there," Arya replied, showing her the slides she had drafted. "I'm focusing on how these trends tie into Mercer's strategic goals." Jenna studied the screen, nodding slowly. "Good. Keep refining. We'll review it tomorrow morning." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "You're doing well, Arya. Keep it up." The rare compliment caught Arya off guard, but she managed a small smile. "Thanks, Jenna. I will." As Jenna walked away, Arya felt a flicker of pride. But the pressure remained. The review wasn't just a chance to showcase her skills, it was a test of whether she could thrive under scrutiny, and she knew Nathan would be watching for any sign of weakness. As the office emptied out that evening, Arya stayed behind, reviewing her slides for the 100th time. The data was solid, her insights were clear, and the narrative she had built was strong. Yet the weight of the upcoming review pressed heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just about impressing Mercer's team, it was about proving her value, silencing the doubts that Nathan and even a small part of herself kept feeding. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The faint hum of the HVAC system was the only sound in the empty office. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. She picked it up and saw a text from James. "How's the prep going?" For a moment she debated whether to respond. James had been supportive but hands-off, allowing her to navigate this challenge largely on her own. That independence had been empowering, but right now she couldn't deny that a bit of encouragement would go a long way. "Almost ready," she typed back. "Just putting the finishing touches on the slides." His reply came quickly. "Good. Trust your instincts. They've gotten you this far. And remember, Mercer's team is looking for confidence as much as competence. Show them you believe in what you're presenting. The words were simple, but they resonated. Confidence as much as competence. Arya set the phone down, letting the advice settle. She knew the material better than anyone else on the team. Now she just had to believe it. The next morning, the office buzzed with anticipation as the team gathered for a final prep session before the review. Jenna's usual composure was on full display, though her clipped instructions revealed the pressure she felt. Nathan, meanwhile, seemed unusually subdued, though his calculating gaze lingered on Arya more than once. When it was time to rehearse, Jenna turned to Arya. "Let's hear your segment," she said, motioning for her to take the lead. Arya stepped forward, her slides displayed on the large screen at the front of the room. As she began, her voice was steady, each word carefully chosen to emphasize the connection between the data and Mercer's strategic goals. She highlighted key trends, proposed actionable solutions, and tied everything back to the client's objectives with precision. Nathan interrupted midway, his tone laced with skepticism. "These projections assume a lot of market stability. What's your contingency plan if those assumptions don't hold?" Arya anticipated his challenge. She had prepared for this. "Great question," she replied smoothly, clicking to the next slide. "We've modeled alternative scenarios based on varying levels of market volatility. As you'll see here, the recommendations remain effective under both moderate and high-risk conditions, with slight adjustments to resource allocation." The room was silent as she walked them through the contingency plans, her confidence unwavering. Nathan leaned back, his expression carefully neutral, but Arya caught the flicker of frustration in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to be so prepared. When she finished, Jenna nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the level of depth we need. Good work, Arya." The rehearsal continued, but Arya felt a shift in the room. She had held her own, and even Nathan's sharp edges seemed to dull in the face of her composure. By the time they wrapped up, Jenna was confident they were ready for Mercer's team. Later, as Arya packed up her notes, Jenna approached her. "You've done a great job," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "Tomorrow is just another step. You're ready for this." Arya nodded, gratitude swelling in her chest. "Thank you, Jenna." As she left the office that evening, the crisp Chicago air filled her lungs. The review with Mercer's team loomed large, but Arya no longer felt daunted. She had prepared for this moment, and she intended to make it count. Whatever came next, she knew she could face it head-on. The Mercer review would either cement her place on the team or reveal cracks she'd have to mend. Either way, she was ready to fight for her future. The Mercer review day arrived with an energy that was both electric and tense. Arya arrived early, her nerves simmering beneath a composed exterior. The conference room had been meticulously prepared, with every detail tailored to impress Mercer's team. The presentation deck was loaded onto the sleek projector system, polished and ready for its moment. Jenna stood at the head of the room, giving final instructions to the team. "Mercer's people are sharp," she said, her tone brisk but encouraging. "They'll ask tough questions and they won't hesitate to point out gaps. Stay focused, back up your points with data, and, above all, project confidence." Arya nodded along with the others, clutching her notes tightly. Her segment on market insights was a cornerstone of the presentation, and she felt the weight of its importance. She glanced at Nathan, who was scrolling through his phone with a look of practiced indifference. Despite his nonchalance, she knew he was waiting for any opportunity to undermine her. The team from Mercer arrived promptly, a group of 5 executives led by a silver-haired man with a commanding presence. Introductions were made, and Jenna kicked off the presentation with her usual poise. Each segment flowed seamlessly, setting the stage for Arya's moment. When it was her turn, Arya took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice was steady as she launched into her analysis, highlighting the key market trends and tying them to Mercer's strategic goals. She moved confidently through each slide, her preparation paying off as she answered questions from the Mercer team with clarity and precision. But just as she was hitting her stride, one of Mercer's executives, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, interrupted. "Your projections are interesting, but they seem overly optimistic. What's your fallback if these trends don't materialize?" Arya paused, her mind racing. She had anticipated questions like this, but the directness of the challenge caught her off guard. For a brief moment, doubt flickered, but she quickly recovered. "Thank you for pointing that out," she replied, clicking to an auxiliary slide. "We've accounted for alternative scenarios, including fluctuations in market growth. As you can see here, our recommendations hold under varying conditions, with adjustments to resource allocation to maintain alignment with Mercer's objectives." The executive leaned back, studying the slide carefully before nodding. "Interesting. I'll want to explore those scenarios further in the Q&A." Arya relaxed slightly, her confidence returning. She finished her segment strong, handing the presentation back to Jenna. As the team moved into the Q&A portion, she noticed Nathan's expression shift, his usual smugness replaced by something closer to irritation. It was clear he had hoped she would falter. As the Q&A session unfolded, the room became a crucible of high-stakes discussion. Mercer's team probed deeper into the presentation, their questions sharp and unforgiving. Jenna handled much of the questioning with her characteristic precision, but when the discussion shifted to Arya's segment, she knew it was her time to step forward again. One of the Mercer executives, a younger man with an analytical demeanor, asked, "Your alternative scenarios are thorough, but I'm curious. How did you prioritize which market shifts to focus on? It seems like certain emerging sectors were excluded." Arya nodded, acknowledging the validity of the question. "We prioritized based on 2 criteria," she began, her tone measured. "First, alignment with Mercer's core strategic objectives, and second, sectors with the highest probability of sustainable growth over the next 5 years. While some emerging sectors show promise, the volatility of those markets didn't meet our risk thresholds." She paused to pull up another supporting slide. "However, we've included an appendix with exploratory data on those sectors for your team to review. While they weren't part of the main recommendations, they could be viable long-term opportunities depending on your risk tolerance." The executive leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. "That's a smart approach," he said. "I'd like to follow up on those appendix findings later." Arya felt a swell of relief and pride. She was holding her own under scrutiny, and the acknowledgement from Mercer's team bolstered her confidence. Even Jenna gave a small nod of approval, a rare sign of satisfaction. But the moment of reprieve didn't last long. Nathan, who had remained relatively quiet, seized the opportunity to speak. "If I may," he began, his tone polite but laced with underlying malice, "there's an assumption baked into these projections that might be worth revisiting. Specifically, the reliance on market stability within the current geopolitical climate." He turned to the Mercer executives, gesturing toward the presentation screen. "While Arya's analysis is detailed, I'd argue it doesn't fully account for the potential impact of destabilizing global factors, such as supply chain disruptions or shifting trade policies." The room tensed, all eyes turning to Arya. It was a deliberate move, one designed to undermine her credibility while positioning Nathan as the more seasoned expert. For a split second, the doubt returned, but Arya quickly pushed it aside. "Those factors were considered," she said firmly, meeting Nathan's gaze. "In fact, we modeled scenarios incorporating those risks, which you can see in the secondary contingency plans. While they do introduce volatility, Our recommendations remain adaptive enough to mitigate their impact." She turned back to Mercer's team, addressing them directly. "What's critical here is not just the data, but the flexibility of our strategy. We've structured it to pivot quickly in response to unexpected changes, ensuring Mercer's goals remain achievable even under challenging conditions." Nathan opened his mouth as if to respond, but the silver-haired leader of Mercer's team cut in. "I think we've heard enough on this point," he said, his tone decisive. "Arya's explanation is clear, and the adaptability she outlined aligns with what we need." Nathan's face tightened, but he said nothing. Arya resisted the urge to let her relief show. She had weathered his challenge and emerged stronger for it. The meeting concluded shortly after, with Mercer's team thanking Jenna and her group for the comprehensive presentation. As they left the room, the silver-haired executive turned to Jenna and said, "Your team did well today. I'm particularly impressed with Arya. Her analysis was sharp, and she handled our questions with poise." Jenna smiled, though her usual professionalism tempered the expression. "Thank you. We'll continue refining our approach to ensure everything aligns perfectly." When the room emptied, Jenna turned to Arya. "You handled yourself well," she said, her tone uncharacteristically warm. "Nathan's challenge was a test, whether he meant it that way or not, and you passed." Arya nodded, her exhaustion tempered by pride. "Thank you," she said quietly. As she returned to her desk, Nathan brushed past her without a word, his silence as telling as any insult. She had taken his best shot and stood her ground. That evening, as Arya walked home under the glow of the city lights, she reflected on the day's events. The Mercer review had been a trial by fire, but she had emerged stronger, more confident in her abilities. Nathan's games would continue, she was sure of it, but for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of triumph. The Mercer project wasn't over, and new challenges loomed on the horizon, but for the first time in a long while, Arya felt like she was winning, and she had no intention of stopping. The aftermath of the Mercer review left the office buzzing with cautious optimism. While the final decision still rested with Mercer's team, Jenna's rare compliments and the executive's positive feedback were enough to give the group a sense of accomplishment. For Arya, the experience felt like a turning point. She had faced intense scrutiny, handled Nathan's underhanded tactics, and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. As the week progressed, the focus shifted to refining the deliverables for the next phase of the project. Arya's role remained pivotal, and her workload seemed to double overnight. She embraced the challenge, pouring herself into the details and leaning into the rhythm of the team. Her confidence grew with every passing day, but the pressure never fully eased. Nathan's lingering presence served as a constant reminder that any misstep could undo her progress. It was late one evening when Jenna called Arya into her office. The blinds were partially drawn, and the faint glow of her computer screen cast soft shadows across the room. Jenna motioned for Arya to sit, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Jenna began, folding her hands on the desk. "Your work on the Mercer account has been exceptional. You've shown not only technical skill but a level of resilience that's rare in someone so new to this environment." Arya blinked, taken aback by the unexpected praise. "Thank you," she said, unsure of what else to say. Jenna leaned back slightly, her sharp eyes studying Arya. "That said, I need you to be aware of the dynamics you're navigating here. Nathan, for instance, isn't just testing you for the sake of it. He sees you as a threat." Arya frowned. "A threat? To what?" "To his position," Jenna replied bluntly. "Nathan thrives on being the smartest person in the room, and you've proven that you can match his intellect. He doesn't like competition, and he's not above playing dirty to keep his edge." The revelation sent a ripple of unease through Arya. She had known Nathan was difficult, but she hadn't fully grasped the extent of his motivations. "So what do I do?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the apprehension building inside her. "You stay sharp," Jenna said firmly. "Don't let him rattle you, but don't underestimate him either, and if he steps out of line, you let me know immediately." Arya nodded, the weight of Jenna's words settling heavily on her shoulders. "I understand." Jenna's expression softened slightly. "You're doing great, Arya. Keep it up. But remember, success here isn't just about the work. It's about navigating the people around you." As Arya left Jenna's office, her mind raced with thoughts of Nathan. She had worked too hard to let someone like him derail her progress, but Jenna's warning made it clear that the road ahead would be far from smooth. Over the next few days, Arya kept Jenna's warning at the forefront of her mind. Nathan's interactions with her remained sharp and calculated, his critiques more pointed than ever. Though she kept her composure outwardly, she couldn't ignore the tension simmering beneath the surface. He was waiting for her to slip, and she was determined not to give him the satisfaction. One afternoon, during a team strategy session, Nathan found his opportunity. The group had gathered in the main conference room to finalize a proposal for the next Mercer deliverable. Arya had spent hours preparing a detailed report on market risks and mitigation strategies, and she was ready to present her findings. But as she started to speak, Nathan interjected. "Before we dive into Arya's section," he said smoothly, his tone laced with faux professionalism, "I'd like to point out a potential flaw in the overarching assumptions." He turned to the team, gesturing toward the shared screen. "These projections hinge heavily on one market stabilizing within the next quarter, but recent reports suggest that's far from guaranteed. If we don't account for that instability, Mercer's team could see this as a lack of foresight." The room went silent, the tension palpable. Arya glanced at Jenna, who raised a brow but said nothing, clearly waiting to see how Arya would respond. Arya took a steady breath. She refused to let Nathan take control of the narrative. "That's a fair point," she said, keeping her voice calm. "But it's one we've already addressed. If you turn to page 6 of the report, you'll find a breakdown of alternative scenarios, including adjustments for market volatility." She pulled up the slide on the screen, highlighting the section in question. "These scenarios were built specifically to address the kind of instability you're describing. They demonstrate how Mercer's strategy remains viable even under less than ideal conditions." Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "Interesting," he said after a pause. "I must have missed that section." Arya didn't miss the faint flicker of irritation in his eyes. He had intended to undermine her, but she had been ready for him. Jenna nodded approvingly, taking the lead. "Good catch, Arya. Let's ensure that section is emphasized in the final presentation. It's a critical piece of the narrative." The discussion moved on, but Arya felt the weight of the moment linger. Nathan's tactics had failed this time, but she knew it wouldn't be the last. He wasn't just an obstacle, he was a calculated adversary, and he wasn't going to back down. Later that evening, as Arya reviewed her notes in the quiet of her apartment, she reflected on the day's events. Navigating the dynamics of the office was proving to be as challenging as the work itself. But as much as Nathan's games frustrated her, they also pushed her to be sharper, more prepared. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Strong performance today. Keep the momentum going." Arya smiled faintly, her determination reigniting. Nathan might be a constant presence in her way, but she was learning how to handle him. Each challenge was another step forward, another chance to prove she belonged in this world, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. The days ahead promised even more hurdles, but Arya welcomed them. She was no longer the hesitant, uncertain woman she had been when she first walked into Hawthorne Investments. She was stronger now, more focused, and she was ready to keep climbing, no matter how steep the path became. The invitation arrived unexpectedly, a formal email from Priya with the subject line, "Family Gathering, Important." Arya's first instinct was to ignore it. After the blowout with Scarlett and Priya at the house, she had no desire to re-enter their orbit. Yet something about the wording tugged at her curiosity. It wasn't like Priya to send messages dripping with diplomacy. Arya opened the email and scanned its contents. The gathering was framed as a celebration of some vague milestone in Priya's life, another transparent attempt at self-promotion. But what caught Arya's attention was the mention of Scarlett's declining health. It was subtle, almost buried, but the phrase, "This could be a meaningful time for us all to reconnect," hinted at something deeper. Against her better judgment, Arya decided to go. She wasn't sure if it was guilt, curiosity, or some lingering sense of obligation that swayed her, but the decision left her feeling uneasy. As much as she had grown stronger in her professional life, the wounds inflicted by her family still felt raw. Stepping back into their world meant risking exposure to the very toxicity she had fought to escape. The event was held at Priya's upscale townhouse, a polished space filled with carefully curated decor meant to impress. Arya arrived early, determined to get the ordeal over with as quickly as possible. She had barely stepped through the door when Priya swooped in, her bright smile more performative than genuine. "Arya!" Priya exclaimed, drawing her into a stiff hug. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Mum will be so happy to see you." Arya forced a polite smile. "I didn't want to disappoint," she replied, her tone deliberately neutral. The atmosphere inside was as suffocating as Arya had expected. Guests mingled in clusters, their conversations laced with feigned interest and subtle one-upmanship. Priya guided Arya toward the main living area, where Scarlett sat on an elegant armchair, her posture as commanding as ever despite a slight frailty in her demeanor. "Look who's here," Priya announced, her voice dripping with exaggerated enthusiasm. Scarlett's eyes flicked up to meet Arya's, her expression unreadable. "So you decided to show up," she said, her tone carrying equal parts surprise and disapproval. "I figured it was time," Arya replied evenly, refusing to be baited. Priya chimed in, gesturing for Arya to sit. "Mum's been asking about you. She doesn't say it, but I know she misses you." Arya doubted that, but she took the offered seat anyway. The tension between her and Scarlett was palpable, and it didn't go unnoticed by the surrounding guests, who cast curious glances their way. Scarlett leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering so only Arya could hear. "You've been busy," she said, her tone laced with implication. "I've heard about your work at Hawthorne. Making waves, are you?" Arya straightened, meeting her mother's gaze without flinching. "I'm doing what I need to do." Scarlett's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Let's hope it's enough. It would be a shame if all that effort went to waste." Before Arya could respond, Priya swept in again, steering the conversation toward lighter topics to diffuse the brewing tension. But the exchange left Arya simmering. Her mother's veiled comments, as always, were designed to undermine her, to remind her that no matter how far she climbed, Scarlett would never see her as anything but inadequate. As the evening wore on, Arya found herself retreating to the quieter corners of the house, seeking refuge from the exhausting charade. Yet even there, she couldn't escape the weight of her family's expectations. The gathering had been framed as a chance to reconnect, but it was clear to Arya that nothing had changed. Scarlett and Priya were still playing their same roles, and she was tired of being cast as the outsider. Before leaving, Arya found herself alone with Scarlett again, this time in the dimly lit study. The room, lined with shelves of untouched books, felt as hollow as their relationship. "You didn't have to come," Scarlett said, her voice quieter now, almost contemplative. Arya hesitated, caught off guard by the change in tone. "I came because I thought it might matter." "Does it?" Scarlett asked, her gaze sharp but not unkind. For the first time there was a glimmer of something vulnerable in her eyes. Arya took a deep breath. "It might, if you could let go of who you think I should be." Scarlett didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied her daughter for a long moment, as if seeing her in a new light. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," she said finally, her voice soft but weighted. "I just hope it's enough." The words weren't an apology, but they weren't the usual condemnation either. It was the closest Scarlett had come to acknowledging Arya's growth, and while it wasn't everything, it was enough for now. As Arya left the townhouse, the cool night air filled her lungs, clearing the lingering tension. She had faced her family and come out intact, stronger even. It wasn't closure, but it was a step forward, and for now, that was enough. The office buzzed with a different kind of energy as the team geared up for the final Mercer presentation. The weeks of intense preparation had culminated in this moment, and everyone seemed acutely aware of the stakes. For Arya, the day carried an added weight. This wasn't just a presentation. It was her opportunity to solidify her place on the team and prove, once and for all, that she belonged here. She arrived earlier than usual, armed with a meticulously prepared deck and a mental checklist of potential questions she might face. Jenna was already in the conference room, reviewing her own notes. She glanced up as Arya entered, giving her a small nod of acknowledgement. "Big day," Jenna said, her tone neutral, but her expression subtly encouraging. "Are you ready?" Arya set her materials down, straightening her posture. "As ready as I'll ever be." Jenna studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You've come a long way, Arya. Just remember, confidence is half the battle. You know the material. Trust that." Arya nodded, the words bolstering her resolve. She had spent countless hours poring over the data, refining her analysis, and anticipating every possible angle Mercer's team might take. She wasn't going to let doubt creep in now. As the room began to fill with team members and the final logistics were ironed out, Nathan arrived, his usual air of smug confidence firmly in place. He took a seat near the head of the table, his gaze briefly flicking to Arya before settling on his laptop. She could almost feel him waiting, anticipating any stumble that might give him ammunition. When Mercer's executives arrived, the atmosphere shifted. The silver-haired leader from their previous meeting exchanged pleasantries with Jenna before settling into his seat. Introductions were brief, and soon the presentation was underway. Jenna opened with her usual polished delivery, setting the stage before transitioning smoothly into Arya's segment. Arya took a deep breath as Jenna handed the floor over to her. Rising from her chair, she stepped to the front of the room, her fingers steady as she advanced to her slides. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned toward her. This was her moment. She began with confidence, walking Mercer's team through the key trends she had analyzed and the actionable strategies tailored to their goals. Her voice was clear and deliberate, each point reinforced with data visualizations and well-chosen examples. As she moved through her segment, she could feel the room leaning in, her words resonating with the executives. When she paused to field questions, one of the Mercer team members raised a concern. "Your projections are impressive, but they seem optimistic about market adaptability. What steps would you recommend if external disruptions, say regulatory changes, create a roadblock?" Arya had anticipated this. She clicked to a backup slide, seamlessly addressing the concern. "We've modeled scenarios that account for regulatory shifts, particularly in sectors where policy changes are more likely. In those cases, we recommend reallocating resources to lower-risk initiatives while maintaining a foothold in the affected markets." This approach minimizes disruption while allowing for quick re-entry when conditions stabilize. The executive nodded thoughtfully, seemingly satisfied. Aria's confidence grew with each question, and by the time she concluded her segment, she felt a ripple of approval from the Mercer team. Even Jenna's subtle nod from the corner of the room reaffirmed that she had hit her mark. But as she prepared to sit, Nathan spoke up. "If I may," he began, his tone polite but calculated. "Aria's analysis is strong, no doubt. However, I'd argue that some of these recommendations hinge too heavily on current trends. What's the fallback if those trends reverse unexpectedly?" Aria didn't hesitate. She turned back to the screen and gestured to another slide. "That's why we've built flexibility into these strategies. If trends reverse, the recommendations can pivot to focus on secondary opportunities, which you'll see outlined here." She paused, letting the visuals speak before continuing. "The core strength of this proposal is its adaptability. It's not tied to any single outcome, which ensures Mercer stays ahead regardless of market shifts." Nathan's smirk faltered, and the room remained engaged, Mercer's executives nodding in agreement. As the presentation wrapped up, the silver-haired leader stood to address the room. "Excellent work, Jenna, and to your team as well. Aria," he said, turning his gaze directly to her, "your insights were particularly impressive. It's clear you've put a great deal of thought into ensuring our objectives are met." Aria felt a swell of pride but kept her composure. "Thank you. It's been a privilege to work on this project." When the Mercer team departed, the room erupted into quiet murmurs of relief and satisfaction. Jenna approached Aria, her usual sharp demeanor softened. "That was well done. You've proven yourself." Aria smiled, the weight of the day finally lifting. As she packed up her materials, she caught Nathan watching her from across the room. He offered no comment, but his narrowed eyes spoke volumes. She had succeeded, and he knew it. Walking out of the building that evening, the cool air felt invigorating. The Mercer presentation had been her biggest test yet, and she had passed. For the first time, she truly felt like she belonged, not just at Hawthorne Investments, but in the world she was building for herself. The journey wasn't over, but this victory was a moment to savor. The conference room buzzed with quiet anticipation as the final moments of the quarterly company meeting approached. This wasn't just another update session. It was the culmination of months of effort, risks, and triumphs. Aria sat near the front, her thoughts racing as she glanced around the room, filled with colleagues she had come to respect and, in some cases, outmaneuver. The Mercer project had been a resounding success, earning Hawthorne Investments a lucrative partnership and solidifying their position in a competitive market. At the head of the room, James stood, exuding his usual commanding presence. He had just finished outlining the company's strategic goals for the next quarter and was now transitioning into acknowledgements. "This quarter's achievements wouldn't have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of our team," he began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of pride. "And one individual in particular demonstrated the kind of vision, resilience, and leadership we value most." Aria felt the weight of the room's attention shift toward her. James's gaze met hers, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. "Aria," James continued, "your work on the Mercer account was exemplary. You not only navigated complex challenges, but did so with a level of professionalism and insight that has set a new standard for this team. As of today, I'm pleased to announce your promotion to lead strategist." The room broke into applause, and Aria felt her chest tighten with emotion. She managed a composed smile, though her heart was pounding. This wasn't just a title or recognition, it was validation. She had climbed a steep and often treacherous path to get here, and now she was standing on solid ground. As the applause subsided, James added with a faint smile, "And I have no doubt you'll continue to make waves." Arya nodded, a quiet determination shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." After the meeting concluded, the team dispersed, offering Arya congratulatory smiles and handshakes. Jenna approached her, a rare warmth softening her usually sharp demeanor. "Well deserved," Jenna said simply, handing Arya a folder filled with documents for her new role. "You've earned this, but don't think for a second the pressure lets up." Arya laughed lightly, appreciating the honesty. "I wouldn't expect it to." As she exited the conference room, Nathan stood near the hallway, his arms crossed. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a guarded expression. For a moment Arya thought he might ignore her, but he stepped forward. "You proved me wrong," he admitted, his tone begrudging but sincere. "I didn't think you had it in you, but you do." Arya paused, her surprise evident. "Thank you, Nathan. That means more than you know." He gave her a small nod before walking away, leaving Arya with a strange sense of closure. The rivalry that had once consumed so much of her energy now felt like a thing of the past. She had won, not by tearing anyone down, but by building herself up. Later that evening, Arya found herself walking along the Chicago River, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered jewels. The cool air carried a sense of renewal, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to simply be still. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Scarlett. "I heard about your promotion. Congratulations. I hope you know how proud your father would be." Arya stared at the words for a long moment, the emotions complex and layered. She didn't reply, not yet, but the acknowledgement was enough for now. As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, Arya looked out over the city. She had fought for every inch of the ground she now stood on, and the journey had transformed her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, shaping her future on her own terms. A quiet smile spread across her face as she turned toward the skyline, ready to embrace whatever came next. This wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning, and for the first time she truly felt free.